So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I know it's near and dear to Dave, and pretty much anyone else who's been doing this for a long time. I like to tell a story that I started doing real MDM 20 years ago when there was no such thing, and we took 3 years and spent well into 5 figures to get done what was, in hindsight, still a pretty robust solution to this issue. Luckily, we had a CEO who had been a CIO and had had technical roles in his career, and there was such a business problem, such IT overhead, such gaps in business functionality in this organization that we were pretty much able to spend what we needed to get these things solved, and we did. And I continued in that vein for several years, sort of with the big bang, convince everybody that this is the right thing to do, and then of course deliver. And you have to do that. We don't want to lose sight of that. But for years, these were very, very expensive propositions, and it's amazing to me how the folklore has lived on. But I've been in this space like Dave for a long time, and that just doesn't work anymore. You have to be able to deliver value in, I'm going to say, 3 to 6 months or even less. I had a conversation this morning where somebody was talking about 4 weeks that they had to have this done in the era of COVID. So again, the trend for me has been, starting off with just these huge expenditures, but again, delivering huge value, but all at once. And there's a lot of inherent risk involved in that. And moving more and more towards sort of what we do at Profisee today, which is, and we can talk about this. We will talk about it more later on. Business priorities. What exactly do you hope to get out of this? And there's more talk about that these days than I need to clean up all the customer data I have or product data I have. So Dave, I'm wondering if you've seen the same thing over the years.
I have, Bill. I've seen exactly the same thing. I started actually as a tools vendor building MDM and customer data integration tools back in the day, and we spent a lot of time convincing people that life would be a better place and the organizations would be a better place if they had this huge platform to run all their data on and put all this structure in place. And these projects went on forever, and they weren't necessarily as successful as they wanted, and they cost a lot of money. And I've seen exactly the same trend where people are pushing for quicker and faster value. And over the years, I've really learned that the key is in the data, right? Is the data describes the business and how does the business operate, and the key is in the data. So as we work through it at VIQTOR DAVIS, we look much more at the data and the way the data describes the business now, and then the large projects are looking more at looking further down the road. We're looking at quick time to value and very quick time to value in the months and weeks time frame. So I agree completely.
Sorry, I'm just bringing back my slideshow here. Okay, there we go. So again, there are a lot of things that play into this. So I've been in 2 prospect and client sessions already today where someone said, well, MDM's reputation has followed it. I won't say it precedes it; it's preceded it. Where when people start to think about MDM in their organizations these days, they go right to that sort of old impression they have of this is going to take a long time. It's going to be horrendous. How can you say 3 to 6 months? How do people even do this? And there are a lot of technical answers to that question that are well doable now with the current technology that's available, moving from different styles of MDM, which we won't necessarily get into today. But I would say, the first discussion we often have to have is, well, if you want to be agile, I've heard that term used today, actually, I want to be agile with MDM. Well, if you want to do that, you almost have to be outcome. I won't even say almost. You have to be outcomes focused. What is it you expect to get out of this? What's the minimal sort of logical and physical data model that you can incorporate into this and deliver the first 1, 2, 3 business outcomes that you hope to achieve? And it's amazing to me, and Dave, I'm going to throw it back to you on this in a second, that even once you get people to move from data, and one of the things I use to provoke people is to say to them, the biggest problem with all these initiatives for data management is the focus on data. And by that, I mean the focus on data to the exclusion of outcomes. And even once you get somebody to have the light bulb go off and they sort of stop saying they need to do all their customer data, all their product data, all their asset data, or all their data, it's sort of the minute you take your hands off them and leave the room, the inertia sends them back to that, where they come back and say, I attacked my first domain, and I always stop them and say, well, what do you mean you attacked your first domain? We decided that you needed three, some attributes from three domains to do that, and we even came to a model. What happened? So there's this kind of inertia back to my data's filthy. I need to clean it. Have you seen the same thing?
Yes, I find people tend to gravitate towards the data rather than gravitate to the value. What we look at and try and drive people towards and keep repeating the conversation is around the benefit that they're going to get from the usage of the data. What does high quality data mean to you, and what does high quality data mean to your business in terms of, it might be three domains. Let's join those three domains and give the right data to the right audience so that they can make the right decision at the right time. If you flip to slide 15 really quickly, I can talk briefly about that in that construct, where we try and split the benefits into three basic areas. And we saw historically, people would always start with the articles of faith. This belief that the massive MDM system would be hugely beneficial for their business and it would change the business. And while that is an important construct, and we look at the North Star of data management, which is that guiding light as to where you want to believe, we need to build the increments with the early realized benefits and the anecdotal evidence. And what I mean by that is the early realized benefits are exactly what data does this person need to be better today, right? And that might be a better view of customer, or a better view of product, or probably a slightly better view of both, but it's narrowly constrained to that benefit. And then also look at and build the analysis through these anecdotes. I've had a great deal of success just talking to people, working through with people and understanding the anecdotes and the stories that they tell of behavior or data being slightly poorer than they would like it. I remember having a conversation where they were saying that they visited an organization actually in San Antonio, and what they discovered was the contact they were going to visit wasn't working there anymore, right? and it's a classic problem, classic result. Salesperson goes on site, the person they were told to go visit isn't working there anymore. Classic master data problem. Your contact data wasn't good enough, the background wasn't good enough, the person showed up with the wrong information, a wasted day, wasted visit. And those anecdotes are rife throughout the organization. And so I split my requirement set into these three strata to say, okay, what are the early realized benefits, which might be, do I have enough email addresses? Do I have enough contacts? Very straightforward metrics. Then into the anecdotes and the stories that people tell of bad data. And then at the bottom of that, you've got the articles of faith that lead you into that picture of that guiding North Star that starts to say, the world would be better if we had all these domains properly master managed.
Right. And you just made me think of one of the last things I did as a practitioner, and ironically, it was at a software company who should know better. The folklore, and it was true, was that sales reps would sit in the parking lot of a client with an iPad trying to figure out what the client already owned that we sold them.
Right.
So that they didn't try and sell it to them again. And the kicker of all that was it actually had to be an experienced salesperson to interpret what they were looking at. If it was a new hire or recent on board, they couldn't even decipher what was on that iPad. So this is a case of delivering data. You need all that stuff put together and integrated and give it to them. And it took somebody that actually had visibility into that project to read the results.
Right. And then from this, we start to build into the iterative cycle where, keeping that North Star, that guiding light in mind, we can iterate through building quick time to value and quick responses for MDM, for master data, and just make the data better for this person for this purpose. So it's kind of, okay, how can we get the contact data better for the sales rep.
Right.
But getting all the way down to that narrow view of value that starts to say, okay, now the master data platform, of which Profisee is great, the master data platform becomes a technology to deliver that value from the high value data that you actually require for that individual. Right. And then it's a matter of prioritizing that and driving that roadmap out and that roadmap through.
Right, and there's actually I was really lucky before we got into the current lockdown situations that I did a CIO forum in Phoenix for 60 CIOs out west back in December, and it's funny, you do a lot of talking around this stuff. You probably experienced this, and all of a sudden you see something that you can say in a new way, and typically they were all concerned with selling data management to the business, governance, MDM, anything like that. And I finally, something made a connection in my brain, and I said, let me ask you this. You're a bunch of CIOs. If you decided after looking at the IT landscape, you started where you started on the job you have now, and you decided that you needed an enterprise service bus so you could, because it was too expensive to build any more point integrations, and the maintenance is costing you too much, would you tell the business that? And of course, they all just said, what's wrong with you? Of course not.
Of course
and
not.
My response is, you're doing that with data because you think everybody understands it.
That's right. And what we spend a lot of time, I was working with a client for the last few months, and we've been working through with them, just re-describing their data back to them and how their business uses data and how their business could use the data, and finishing the final mile, convincing them that this isn't just a technology deployment, but it's actually a change management deployment as well, where the value is actually only realized when the behaviors of the individuals change because the data is actually better and the data is deployed there. So again, it goes all the way back to those early benefits and those business stories, those business anecdotes that start to say, okay, yes, I'm going to put in a technical platform. I'm going to build this data structure. I'm going to do the data analysis, the data model, and lay this out to deliver the value to them. And then I'm going to transform the behaviors of the organization to make sure you're using it. It becomes back to the story that you were saying about the iPad and people sitting in the parking lot. At least they're sitting in the parking lot with the iPad before they go in. Now let's make sure that they're looking at the right data on that iPad, and that they are actually looking at it hopefully the day before and preparing to know, what am I going to sell to this contact? What am I going to sell to this person? Or how am I going to interact with this person? And understanding the customer satisfaction history and various other things. And I know Profisee has some great technology to help do that. If you want to take that on.
Yeah, and we have technology, and we also one of the reasons I joined was we take a lot of care in terms of the discussions we're having now, having them with our prospects, and it can be difficult. I had a session this morning with a prospect who got on and said all the things everybody always says. We need to clean up all our customer data. Product data will be next, then asset data. And they went through the litany of things we're talking about here. And then the next thing they said was, but how can we do this agilely? And I said, the way you're describing it, you can't.
Right.
You must go back, and you're going to need to take, and for us, it's 2 weeks total time usually if the prospect shows up when they say they're going to show up and all that stuff, because that's the next question they always ask is, how long will that take for me to put all that together? Well, we'll help you, and we have some output that you'll get, which consists of a roadmap and a business case, and often it works out that what you think is your worst problem is not your worst problem. The person this morning said, we don't understand our customers, and it turned out that by the time we got off the call, they have millions and millions of dollars in back inventory of product.
Right.
And the reason they have it is they keep buying the same things because they don't know they're the same things.
Because they don't have it, don't know they've got it.
Right, and this is a pretty big manufacturing outfit, so just duplicate buying of maybe one SKU is just horrible. And letting it sit there. These are things that take a lot of floor space, and by the time they get off, they said, we really do need to take a look at this. We don't want to spend all this money doing something where we could spend less and get more, kind of thing. Great, now you get it. Where I often start is, this thing, which I started something similar to this a long time ago. I kind of finished it up at Profisee. where it's just a little 50,000-foot level stuff that says, and I always say I was the worst offender sitting there in the lower left of this, so I'm allowed to say whatever I want because I admit right away that I had the problem very early on, and in all those very large implementations, this is sort of how it shook out until the end of maybe the third one, where below the horizontal line here, the x-axis is the finance axis. Below that is saving money, and above it is making money, new money. The vertical axis is a little more interesting to me. It's to the left are things we do now but badly, and to the right are things we can't do at all. So digital transformation, all that stuff. The first thing I say to a client or prospect is, you're talking about the upper right of this diagram. If you're talking about digital transformation, what's the difference? Everybody knows the difference between making money and saving money, but the difference is, if you're in the lower left, this is me as the IT architect saying, I know where all the broken processes are in this company, and most architects do. Or at least I know where most of them are that anybody talks about or will admit to. I can fix those if you just give me enough money.
Yep.
And it could involve MDM or something else, but I'm going to do that. And we walk into meetings where that's the cast of characters. We know what to do. Just show us the technology, do the demo, and we'll tell you if it's what we want or not, or we'll call you back later when we decide. That's okay, and those should be done and tracked. What I always say is, if you build a real business case, whether we help you or not, that's not going to be enough to push you into positive territory with this from business outcomes perspective. It's just anecdotal. What does that mean? That means you need to do things you've never done before. If all you do is fix things that are broken, you're going to have a really hard time justifying the ongoing idea of this. To paraphrase what you said earlier. But if you start collaborating with the business about things they wanted to do and can't, and get that pent up demand out of them, you're going to be much happier, and things are going to get easier because that's the stuff they believe will pay. If you keep fixing problems, eventually someone's going to say, boy, how much are we spending to fix all this, and how bad could it have been? We still grow at 8% a year, and we're all getting paychecks. And I would rather buy a CRM system than do this, which is actually going to add to the problem, right? So you have to start thinking along these lines. And people would say to me, well, why'd you sit in the lower left? And the answer is really because I didn't have to meet any new people. I could do all this myself and eat lunch with the same people I always ate lunch with. To do the upper right, you have to get out of your comfort zone as an IT person. You really do. And it's so critical. I always said, the worst conversations I had was when an IT person would say to me, my business people don't think like this. They're not going to collaborate with me. They're not entrepreneurial. And I felt so strongly, I would say, we need business consultants in here to scare them then.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bill. I agree 100%, and I think I resemble this slide, right? I think I started in the bottom left as well, and as I've worked with more and more clients, I've slowly worked my way towards that business and IT collaboration and lead projects from that perspective. To add to what you said, what I've noticed is that when we start in that way and go down the conversation that you just articulated extremely well, where you end up is you usually end up with a data structure and a data architecture that describes what the company used to look like 2 or 3 years ago, because that's what the architects really understand. They understand what is in place. Unfortunately, it's been built by a continued process and list of reasonably good decisions, all done in isolation, and you end up with this haphazard structure and data architecture that describes the company as it was 2 or 3 years ago. As we move forward and move into digital transformation and move into greater efficiency needed by new ways of doing business and new ways of doing current business, we need to be describing the business as it needs to be in 3 to 5 years time, and making the data architecture lead the business and lead the business collaboration. And that cries out for an agile, flexible model and platform where you start to say, who am I improving it for today, and who do I improve it for next, and then how do I evolve it forwards and start doing the data engineering that realigns the way the business holds together and the way the data architecture and the data structure holds together across the organization. So I love this slide. I think it's really good.
Yeah, and it's got a corollary to it that's sort of the mirror image of what you just described. I wrote an article a couple of days ago about this, where people will say to us, and I've been hearing this for 8 years, they'll ask me if they're incompetent. They'll actually say, how did I get here with all this data laying around? Why didn't we do this the right way at first? Why is there such a big business in data management and governance? And in the MDM tools market, it's a big market. How did this happen? Everybody's like this until they address it. And the answer is you didn't do anything wrong. You're smart. You just did what you got paid to do. And
That's right.
really, since the 60s or 70s, which was to optimize one or two business processes in isolation, nobody asked you to pay attention to what was going on next to you. Even as an IT architect, you were just supposed to make something automated that wasn't before.
That's
And
right.
then you got the rise of multi-suite ERPs and things like that. Even those, and again, everybody did what they thought was best. And the rise of CRM systems, sort of in parallel in the 90s, was, still automating single processes. At best, if you're a suite, you're co-locating all these data stores, but you're really not. And this is the wake-up call people have with MDM versus ERP and CRM, is that those things co-locate, but they didn't take that next step of rationalizing and reconciling all those different data entities that they house. And it's easy to think that they would, because they'd all be there, but as we all know, they don't and didn't. And to a large extent, they didn't really take that on. I think people sort of projected that onto them. But now there's more data debt, again, because of that needs to be paid off.
I agree, and the tolerance of the audience, the tolerance of the consumer for isolated practice and so on has gone down dramatically. We're now seeing where, and the approach that we look at is a data flow approach, where it's kind of
Right.
okay, a individual enters into an organization known as a lead or a prospect, and eventually through a very complex set of interactions, they turn into a customer and eventually might retire or whatever, or multifaceted customer, whatever complex relationship it might turn into. But that is a movement of data through multiple systems along the way. And it's the data that is important. The data is transition. It might start in a Salesforce automation tool, transition into a CRM tool to close the business, transition into ERP to be able to fulfill the business and to bill for the business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a complex transition around one data object, and the ability for these applications now, or the need for these applications to live in an ecosystem where there is a seamless transition through the cycle is imperative, which means we come into the metadata needs and the master data needs. But again, it's down the focus of the data and understanding what is the data necessary to fulfill this purpose, and what is the narrow shots. As we spent a lot of time in crossing the data delta, we spent a lot of time talking about the narrow slice through all the layers of governance, layers of data quality, the layers of MDM, etc., and taking that slice through it to say, what is the value that this data provides? How do I make this slice of data for this audience operate in the most efficient way and flow through my organization in the best way possible, so that I can now start to transform my business and realize more opportunities and more growth?
Absolutely. And what's the appropriate level of management and governance, even within that slice, for each of those
Yep.
data elements? And aside from customers not tolerating it, one of the things I wrote about was, the infrastructure can't tolerate it. You cannot continue to build these infrastructure components every time you introduce a product. I've actually seen slide decks where people prove to their management that, in 2 years, every additional product will result in negative revenue enhancement, because you just keep doing this thing over and over again. So you get into what I used to call the economics of reuse. Data is an asset now that you have to use over and over again. That's the only way to expand. If you can and continue to make money. And again, it flows along this. So, we committed a little bit to sort of showing people how we just split this stuff up. And, this is something we usually start with people just to give them sort of the tripwire. And I won't go through this whole thing, but one of the things that happens here is the what and the why get switched in organizations' minds. So if you ask why you want to do things like MDM and governance, they'll say digital transformation, but that's not really what they want. And I developed a lot of techniques over the years of saying, why do you want to do this, and give me the answer without saying the word data.
Yes.
Just as an exercise, see if you can tell me why you want to do this, but don't say data. Unless you're a data company, then you can say it all you want. If you're monetizing data, I definitely want to hear about that, and you can say the word data. But other than that, I want to hear operational and analytical stuff that talks about process and decisions. Not the under. Again, if this was an ESB you were using to put this together, you wouldn't tell me that if I were a business person. So get me to talk about what it is I want out of this, and it's amazing. I've had versions of this slide given to me by clients, and I've literally said you need to swap columns 1 and 3.
Right, I couldn't agree more, and get them to try and lead them in to be specific, right? The old Six Sigma 5 Whys, drill down, drill down, drill down,
Right,
to get
right.
specific. Exactly who are we reducing the sales cycle for, and exactly what product, so that we can get very specific into prioritization, and very specific, because not all data is created equal as we look at putting in a streamlined data flow, right? I've seen too many people that say, we're going to do data governance. Let's write a whole set of policies across the organization to do governance in the same way. And all the data has to hit this high bar of governance or high bar of quality. And it's kind of, well, that data for that purpose, that level is not appropriate. We can do this much quicker and much more effectively if we get very specific into the benefit, and very specific into who the benefit is going to deliver to.
Right. So, didn't mean to do that. That's interesting. Let me go back. That's what it does. We were trying to think about this yesterday. That's what it does. Gotta love GoToMeeting. Slideshow. There we go. Okay, so again, this is just another tool that sort of gets the discussion going, but we can definitely, and we do, and I'll go into our framework a little bit, not too much here, but again, these are examples of why. So again, we use a Deloitte value map. I won't get into that too heavily as a way to just list these categories and get people to think about them. But I will say most of the time, once it's the light bulb going off. Once we start talking to people and they get this. And we really, I'll speak for myself, I make it sort of a prerequisite. Stop talking to me about 3 to 6 months if you won't talk about this. Because every other way is going to take you, more than one budget cycle. So again, if you keep saying all my customer data, I'm not going to talk to you about 3 to 6 months anymore because it would be dishonest, that kind of thing. So we give them this list, say, look at this, do you see anything else? And there are industry specific things that are pretty interesting. And we have a knack at Profisee for finding the sort of, not just the mainstream characters and players in an industry, but the sort of ancillary ones that service those people. And we get some interesting use cases. Just one sort of last technique, rule of thumb, try to say it without saying the word data. Anybody who's worked with HR has seen the SMART goals thing. I say apply this to your data.
Absolutely.
It's not 100% applicable, but you're just trying to make the light bulb go off, right? You've seen that look where someone says, now I get it. I'll stop saying, and this is just one other way to get them there. Like if you start telling me, they may do all the right things, and then they call us and they say, want to look at my next release plan because I don't feel like something's right, and then we look at it and say, you were doing the right thing till you got here.
Yes.
And can you say this about what you want to do now? And oftentimes before you even get through it, they say, yeah, now I see what I did, and I can change it and make it better. And like I said, just another technique. So we have, again, this is our process. That's the Deloitte value map on the left. There's a way we sort of constrain it to what we call the 4 Cs. And it covers things like how MDM is connected to any larger efforts like an ERP re-engineering project or a one customer thing, so that no one loses sight of that, but also, what's its contribution to that? And you'll see the last thing there is commitment. We tend to very much want ratification before we exit the process. And we usually, I would have said prior to coming in here that we would have had a lot of trouble with that. We usually don't. By the time we get to that, everybody kind of know, and we tell them day one, look, we're going to come back and you're going to have to sign off. So we kind of get that out of the way, but it does work. And again, for me, the most rewarding thing is people find out that what they thought was their biggest problem is not, and they have one that's much bigger, or two that are much bigger. And finally, this is what we deliver. We give them slides. Take this, do whatever. We know you're not PowerPoint experts. Take it upstream, do whatever you want to do with it. And it seems to work. And we do this as a cost of sale, oddly enough.
The other thing I'm sure you find, Bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would expect that although you don't find what they think is their biggest problem often isn't, we often find that the biggest problem, the most beneficial solution is not always the biggest problem, right? It's often a much smaller time to value and a much smaller project to get to significant value than what they initially thought, right? That boil the ocean, I want to clean up all my customer data is way too big of a problem, but doing a particular set of customers for a particular audience is of high value and much, much quicker.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's political capital, right?
Right.
Somebody here came up with a phrase that's it's kind of humorous. What was it? The flywheel of enthusiasm. Somebody gets happy, they start telling people, they show the solution to somebody else, and then your biggest problem is everybody thinks everything is MDM and data governance. Oh, do that for me.
That's right.
And it's a good problem to have, but I've actually, it can be dangerous to your career too, because then you're stuck. What do you end up having to do? Explaining what master data is to a CMO,
That's right.
because what they want is unreasonable. What they want is the methodology. It's not the technology. They think it's the technology, but they really want the way you approached it, and the control that was achieved to the point that it could be, and the business benefits. That's what they want. Often it's they want. I short circuit that discussion by saying you really want the governance, which is probably not 100% true. But that's you want the business part of this. Stop looking at the technology because it might not be the same for you,
Right.
kind of thing.
Right, and the way I often talk about it is I talk about the management. It's the data management rather than the data governance, because well-managed data will be governed appropriately anyway, and it's the management that really drives that, and it's the management of the data and making that everybody's responsibility to make the data into now an asset rather than people abandoning it or not taking responsibility for it. So it's how do we disseminate that management and manage the data appropriately across the whole organization, and drive out to those edges, right? Which is if I go back to the story that I told earlier about the gentleman showing up in San Antonio to visit the wrong person, or he's now sitting in San Antonio, it is his responsibility to change the data to be the right person. Otherwise, the data doesn't get any better, the data doesn't get improved. So now you've started to see a transition in the organization where after he's been in the organization, he's sitting in the parking lot with his iPad and he enters the right data, and then the system, the data management, the MDM platform needs to pick up that and disseminate it across the organization. So now you've got a ecosystem of benefit and an ecosystem that with a rising tide of data management and data benefit.
You bring up a really good thing, and I wouldn't have thought of it. So thanks. Is that the first time I did this 20 years ago? We had it go live, and most of us were pretty brain dead by then after 3 years of building something that there was no MDM, figuring out what this thing was, and then building it and testing it and implementing it across I think 253 source systems. One of the things that happened is productivity went down for like 9 months.
Yep.
And as I said, we were fortunate at the time. I didn't realize how fortunate. We had an ex-CIO as our CEO, and he looked at me and said, I'm packing my desk up because the numbers are just going below the floor. And he said, well, what did you think was going to happen? Of course. And the problem is you're pre-populating all these screens, but nobody trusts it yet. They're still staring at all this stuff, and that's taking just as long as entering it, if not longer. They're making sure the data is correct. In a few months, they're going to realize that 95% of the staring they did was unnecessary. And that's when they're going to trust everything. And that's when you're going to see the hockey stick of productivity go. And he was right. He was right. But I often now tell people, I'm preparing you now. This isn't going to take off like a rocket when you go live. People are not going to be used to that pop-up that says, hey, you're trying to create a duplicate customer. Is that really what you want to do? That's going to slow you down by 60% right away.
It's going to slow you down for a while, and then it'll speed you up again. And what we've tried to do and tried to introduce is this idea of doing a engineering the rollout plan. So we plan for that, and we plan to accelerate that. But I've seen a lot of the systems go in, and where the IT organization will build it and expect people to come and take advantage of it. And with these kinds of systems, we have to actually consciously roll them into new behaviors within the organization, within that benefit targeted audience, and consciously change the behaviors to take advantage of the new data and
Right,
to
exactly.
take advantage of the new environment.
So I see, we're coming up on 45 minutes. We do have one question that's going to lead to a little bit of technology in terms of how to deliver. I think we've talked a lot about how to deliver value early, what to do, what not to do. But before I go to that, I know VIQTOR Davis has some interesting material around this. Is there anything else you want to cover before I take that on?
If you could jump quickly to slide 16, I will.
Sure.
Just as in summary, really, before we go to the question, this is an example sort of conversation that we work through with clients. This is an installer of home improvement products, right? And it's they want to drive growth over the next 5 years. We need to improve our close rate and our prospects. They've got a complex customer ecosystem, both direct and indirect. So if you move up through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps and look at the drill down, it's identify, we have a complex customer ecosystem, identify the elements of the process and assess the biggest impacts. So what is really going on? Ensure the on-site and virtual visits, because they've identified that their visits, they want to actually close on those visits, right? When they're measuring windows or measuring the equipment for replacement, they want to close that right away, right? That's where they have the best effect. So how do we put all the data in there right away to bring that to fruition, but then get specific? Are we talking about new customers? Are we talking about repeat customers? Are we talking about new products or alternate products to be able to improve the knowledge in that sales cycle for that professional who's guiding the sale? Get specific, because then you can get that early value and realize that value quickly, and then actively roll that out. Actively roll it to this person, this professional, when doing this, needs to take advantage of this data and respond with this kind of data. And then iterate on that, keeping that North Star that I was talking about in mind all the time from a architecture and a viewpoint point of view, and push that iteration. And that will lead you to a statement like the one at the top, where all the professionals now have a close target that depends on a full understanding of the customer and expecting 80% of on-site visits to lead to a close before they leave. And that is an important sort of value cycle. And how do you decompose these nebulous high-level value statements into tangible data projects that can lead you into a tangible technical project within a data architecture?
Right. This is awesome. So the question we got is, it's interesting how often this comes up, but it's mostly around. I'm going to paraphrase carefully. It's mostly around, again, that folklore of the heritage of MDM. Everybody talks about how to do this quickly now, but how do I actually do that? And I wasn't really going to get into. I'll get into a little bit of architecture here, and then we'll probably close out, because I think this is the part that we miss a little bit when we do these business level program management communication style presentations or panel discussions. So again, MDM is not this monolithic thing. I think what happens is, and Dave, I'll hand off to you to see for your experience here. When people think MDM, they think centralized. What is the right side of the slide, where MDM is the system of creation, system of record, can't go anywhere else, and that's going to slow down my business, and it's also going to be really expensive because I have to tear up a lot of my source systems, and if I'm lucky, I've got sort of a data integration architecture, which most still do not. If you did, this would be a lot easier. But really, there's a continuum here, and I won't go into registry because outside of healthcare, it doesn't get used much, and a little life sciences. But you can start off being sort of the ODS for your data warehouse, again, just for the attributes that deliver those outcomes, and let people get a look at the data from an analytics perspective and trust it. Again, back to that, I won't stare at the screen anymore once you pre-populate it, because I've seen this in reports and it's always correct. So, it's just, the holy grail of this is a business user coming to you and saying, why aren't we checking for duplicates during data entry? I really want to push you towards reusing this data. I don't understand why it's read only, and because it's great, I can see whole households and super households and all of that, but I really would like to see that during the day, not when I get a report in the morning. And in fact, one of the other ways I help people re-engineer is to say to business people, I want you to think of everything you do by looking at a report or a dashboard today reactively, and then think about what would happen if you could get the same information a record at a time during whatever interaction created this situation. So onboarding is the obvious one, but there are others, check credit, check fraud, all of that. And that's often the first time a business user will say, oh, no one ever answers right away, right? They say, let me get back to you. But some of them do, and they come back and say, that would be really great. Can we really do that? And the answer is, yeah. But again, let's build a business justification. What's that worth to you? Because you will have to start altering some legacy systems potentially. And there are a number of ways you're going to have to decide how you want to do that technically. And it will take some time. And again, back to opportunity cost. You're not going to do something else if you do this. So let's make sure that it's sort of bulletproof as much as it can be and that the risks are as low as they can be made. But again, the idea here is you don't start with the most physically invasive and disruptive, but also transformational MDM style initiative. You start with using the same technology and the same rules engine to create the same data asset, but you don't necessarily have to deploy it in that most invasive way right away.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, from my perspective and my experiences, I think in every one of my clients, I live in every column of this chart, right? Because what we find often is that if you look at the benefit and look at the audience, they don't really want master data management. What they want is mastered data to appear in the system of their choice where they're comfortable at the moment they kind of need it, and trace that backwards as to how should the mastered data get to the consumer of that data. So how should the data, if the audience lives and breathes in a salesforce.com or some application, then how do we make that data correct and make sure it goes through the right workflow and the right process flow so that it is mastered in that construct? That will lead you for that data into one of these styles of data flow. So we often find that we have multiple styles deployed in the same client at the same time for different audiences or for different ways that the data flows. And having a flexible platform that supports that, and starting with what is the data, how does the data get there, and then tracing it back through the organization in terms of the technology, will lead you into a more flexible and a more evolutionary approach than, as you said, jumping to the centralized, because that's what that looks like. It will solve everything.
Great, perfect. Again, couldn't agree more. That was the question that I saw in the window. I'm going to hand it back to Reed, as we may have some more questions that came in through another channel pre-session.
Yeah, hey guys, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hey, awesome. Hey, great job, guys. Great content. Just there was certainly a handful of questions. I sifted through them to find what I think are a couple good ones here. So this is not directed to one person in particular, but to either of you. We covered some of this, but maybe we can revisit it. So the question is, how do you quantify the business benefit / value of MDM in financial terms to get buy-in from management and/or decision makers?
I want to make sure I heard that correctly. Can you do it again?
Yes, I can. How do you quantify the business
Okay.
value of MDM in financial terms?
Okay.
Get buy-in.
So I'll put my quick 2 cents in, and our value consultants here would kill me if I say anything else up front. Financial, dollars are best. And again, if you have an ROI, if you have a CFO's office and there's already an ROI model, you can certainly consult with them around things like blended rates of HR if you save manpower and can redeploy people to other more critical or more valuable operations. That's one way to do it. There are IT costs, again, that should be looked at. One thing we didn't cover, and again, so the short answer is there are generally ways in organizations to do that if you just can apply the improvements that'll happen. Decisions are harder to quantify, operations are easier. That's why one of the reasons I push operational MDM. But, again, if you can't, I'll cop out for a second and say, if you can't do dollars and you can only do operational metrics and everybody buys into them, don't be quick to dismiss that because they're not dollars, because someday you may be able to transform them. And as long as the yardstick is applied consistently across all these things, across all these outcomes to balance risk versus reward, then it's okay. The last thing I would say, and I meant to say this earlier, is all of us that do this, that are interested in quantifying these things, and it includes dollars, is getting comfortable with the concepts of expected risk and expected value. College level accounting says, if something happens to me, what will the damage be? This much money, and it's always a guess. It's usually an educated estimate. This much money, and then what's the probability that could happen? You multiply the two together, and that's the number you work with. It's obviously not a real number. It's the probability of something happening times the damage or the benefit that would occur if it happened, and that way you're comparing apples to apples as you're moving through this. But really, as our value guys would say, money is the best. If you can do it comfortably or even a little uncomfortably, you should. But for me, and I'll speak only for myself and hand to Dave, if you're going to use operational KPIs, just make sure they're consistent, make sure it's a level playing field. But you might have to do that.
Yeah, I would come back to the expected benefits and the results, right? As you start onto the projects and decompose them to be specific enough, which is this is going to improve for this person, then what is the value of that improvement? And can you realize that? Most accounting organizations will give you a way to convert a improvement into a dollar value. And that's pretty well known, whether it's a reallocation of people or a reassignment of people and various other things. You might not get hard dollar, but you will get hard benefits. But don't ignore the soft benefits either. MDM often has a number of soft benefits that are hard to quantify, but my experience says articulate both and attempt to turn them into dollars and attempt to give a structured way and a consistent way of turning them into the dollars and get as hard as possible, right? We saw a lot of the early, talking about MDM from 20 years ago, we saw a lot of very big projects get started on completely soft benefits, fail to realize any hard benefits, and then got either cancelled or stalled out or whatever when they didn't need to. And I think, if you focus in on what benefit am I striving to deliver with this project, not necessarily with this platform, but with this project that uses the platform, then you're in a much better place to getting to those hard value and incremental value over time, and that flywheel of success that you were mentioning, Bill, where the program then starts to accelerate and the value starts to accelerate.
Right, and one of the things you said, soft benefits, and it triggered something. Goodwill is a recognized accounting concept. Goodwill of customers, goodwill of trading partners. It's too far back for me to remember how people quantify it, but an accountant will recognize that. A finance person will recognize that. And even by risk, this is a hard thing to do, but one of the things you can fall back to is what's the risk of doing nothing? So I often bring people all the way back to, well, you're operating, you're making money, everybody's getting paid. Why should we do this? And the reason I'm doing this is because a year from now, someone's going to ask you that when things get tough. Again, as we said earlier, so one of the answers could be, well, we looked at what might happen if we did nothing and the probability of that happening. Again, back to the risk thing, but on the negative side of, what's the cost of doing nothing? What is it? What's the risk if we don't do that? And we've got a pretty surprising number of clients and prospects that either rely on that solely or want to include it, because that's the first time they've been able to sort of articulate this bad feeling they have that things can't continue as they are. And you just have to sort of pull that out of, well, why not?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, great points, guys. Especially the soft benefits component, Dave. So we've got 3 minutes left. There were a few more questions. We can get to them after the event, but one of them, if we could answer quickly, was how do you quantify risk? Statutory, regulatory, trading, hedging, avoidance.
Well, I would go back to sort of what we just said is, what if the worst case, what are all the various things that can happen? So if it's a regulatory stuff is great. I know Dave's going to agree with this because everybody does. If you're at a bank and there's a government regulation, they'll tell you what the fines are if you don't comply. So
Absolutely.
right away, real dollars, they didn't come from you. Do you want to pay them as a cost of doing business, or do you want to actually fix this thing? And by the way, you're going to have goodwill and reputational risk. That's another one that's a recognized accounting concept now. But that's the idea: is if each of these things happen, what would the damage be? And some of them are estimates, some of them are actual. Here's what the penalty would be if I don't comply with this. And then you take the probability of it happening. Again, best estimate, as long as everyone's using the same methodology and the playing field's level, you're probably going to be okay, even if it's not absolutely accurate, which would be almost impossible. So again, it's this idea of what would the damage be, and then what's the probability that's going to happen. And you just add all those numbers up together, and everybody agrees that that's good enough. And if you again go into new processes in addition to damaged current ways of doing things, you're probably going to be okay.
So another way to look at it, I agree 100% with Bill, and getting into the probability of risk, the likelihood of an event happening based off of anecdotes and structured in the past, is something that can be studied. Another thought, though, is that highly or well-managed data across an organization, a well-managed data ecosystem, is almost guaranteed to be compliant, because most of the risk comes from not knowing. So if you actually focus on the hard benefits of I know exactly what accounts this customer has across my entire bank. I know everything about this. I've got well-managed data across the construct. Actually meeting the regulatory requirements is actually very easy. So your biggest benefits are business efficiency generally. I'm operating better. I'm more well-managed. I'm streamlined. I'm more efficient. And then I can tell people exactly what I'm doing very easily. And the regulatory compliance becomes more of a soft benefit than it is a hard benefit.
Awesome. Well, guys, we're at the top of the hour. Fantastic job today on presenting great content, a lot of engagement from the audience as well. So, hey, we appreciate your time, and we thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy day to coming and join Profisee and VIQTOR DAVIS for this event. So we're going to sign off. Everybody can expect the on-demand webinar and slides to be sent within 36 hours. And hope everybody has a great day. Stay safe out there. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.